This is the Anbernic RG DS. Thank you very much to Anbernic for sending this out to me for review. There have been a number of Android handhelds that have come out with dual screens as their main selling point, and Anbernic seems to have taken this in the complete opposite direction as those other handhelds have, specifically in the far more low-cost segment of these particular handhelds, which I think is a wise choice because that is already practically a saturated market with the different options of the high-end dual-screen devices that are out right now, all featuring very high-end chips and a very high price. This starts at $94 at the pre-order price. It's going to be around $100 shipped without an SD card. So let's quickly jump into the specs. There is a standard version. Obviously, that's the $94 that I just said. It'll be a little bit more with shipping. Then there's the 128 gig micro SD card for $109 and a 256 gig card for $124. But the standard model without an SD card is $94 before shipping. The chip that it's using, the CPU, is the Rockchip 3568. Now, there's a lot of things to consider with that Rockchip 3568 chip that's on here. We are running Android 14, and in a little bit I'll reference that it's going to be using 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigabytes of system RAM. So there's 32 gigs of storage. Obviously, some will be used for Android 14 outside of the micro SD card. But that is going to severely impact the types of performance that is possible on this device and the threshold of what is actually playable. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Let's just get right back into the specs of this device, followed up with the GPU specifically. It is an ARM G52 2EE, a fairly low power GPU. And again, the memory and storage is 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage. We have Android 14. Now, running Android 14 with that particular APU with 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of storage, we're really cutting it very close to what is actually capable for this device. And one of the ways that they do that is by not even loading up the Google Play Store. So having all the Google Play Stack and all of that running in RAM while those services are running would severely impact the usability of this device. So they don't have it installed. And that is one way that they're able to achieve getting Android 14 on here. So if you wanted to install anything, you're going to be using third-party launchers or installers like Aptoide or whatever, which you'll have to go and get yourself, or just go ahead and get the APKs yourself and sideload them like I have already done. We'll show some things in here of how we're able to get that. But just keep that in mind. This is a very bare bones Android handheld to be able to hit that price target. And there are other considerations with how everything is here. So the next important thing, obviously, are these two displays. They are two 4-inch IPS OCA full lamination, but they're 640 by 480, and they're both running at 60 hertz. Now, there are a number of things that we have to talk about regarding the displays, especially how Anbernic is driving them in software and things that they still need to improve. They also include a pen. So in the chapter links below, we'll be talking about the refresh rate on these, the input sampling rate of the capacitive layer here, how it compares to the resistive screens that were on the 3DS or the DS themselves, and how I think that they can improve it, and other things that they need to improve, because it looks like the top screen here does go into a power saver mode when it's not active after like 30 or 40 seconds. So we'll talk about that and the implications of that, how I think they can fix it, and we'll get into it a little bit more. So up first, I want to talk about the displays themselves. Both of them are 60 hertz panels. So up first, let's talk about things that I think could be better, and let's start talking about the pen input. Now, they do include this capacitive pen input, which I think is super cool. It has this little circular pad on the front because there is a required amount of surface area for the capacitive displays to even function. This is far different than the resistive screens that were on the DS or 3DS, where you can see it's a stylus that has a very fine point, and that actually uses pressure to signify where the point is rather than the capacitance. So that is a large difference. And what happens is you have a little bit more gross input with this larger surface area. It's not bad. I think one of the things that they really need to do is that when you look at sampling rate, it's actually on both screens, they are sampling at 60 hertz. And it's a 60 hertz panel with a 60 hertz polling rate for the touch sampling. Typically, a lot of Android handhelds are double the frequency of the display. So I would really ask Anbernic to see if they can try to improve this in some way, going up to like 120 hertz or 240 hertz for the input sampling for where you're touching. And the reason that I bring that up is that when we're comparing how pen input works between like an official 3DS or an official DSi versus what is capable on the RGDS, is that effectively on the 3DS, because it has a resistive input and you're going to be able to get finer pen-like input, it is a bit better on the 3DS or the DS. Just a bit, not like it's that much, but it is a noticeable difference. where especially for games like Brain Age, where you need to rapidly input numbers, so it needs to do, character recognition to see what numbers you're pressing in. If that's globbed up, that is going to really trip up Brain Age to be able to determine what type of number you actually wrote, and that actually matters for the speed that you're doing things. Whereas on a 3DS, it is not still perfect, but it is still notably better than what the RGDS is capable of, and that really just has to do with the surface area of the pen. But I would wager that the input sampling itself could be improved, and that is one area where they could improve it. So that's one thing that I think that Anbernic could improve overall. Insofar as the pen input as like its own review section, I think it's generally very good. Like, it's not terrible, it's not unusable, it is completely usable, and only Brain Age really has you rapidly doing movements to actually indicate anything. A lot of other things aren't as rapid, and you can still get by with gross movement, including your finger. And there's something else that we'll talk about, like things that I wish, like for instance, I wish that Anbernic actually made a pen themselves so that it could insert into the device so that it could be more like a DS, so that you can actually stow away the pen in here, because right now you can't. So that's kind of a nitpick, but something that I wish they would have done. Anyway, let's get into the next section, which is how the displays are driven. Now, both of these are 4-inch 640 by 480 60 hertz panels. However, it only looks like the main active panel is constantly running at 60 hertz, whereas the inactive panel, the one that is not accepting inputs, will actually go into a power saver mode after 30 or 40 seconds, where it will actually reduce the frequency of the display down to 40 hertz. Now, this is not ideal, especially when you're playing DS games, because both of those screens basically need to be active at the same time. And what can happen is, because the top panel after 30 or 40 seconds will go to a 40 hertz mode, especially with the swap chain of like how the GPU is relaying those frames to those panels. With that second screen going at 40 hertz, what you're going to notice is that there can be a judder of sorts, so a desynchronization of those frames. And on 2D games, it's not super apparent, but it can be noticeable. And especially if you have a game that has a bunch of fast motion, that is going to be even more apparent. Now, I don't think that there's going to be a ton of DS games that are like this, but what is effectively happening is you have to basically touch the top screen for it to kick back into 60 hertz mode. So it's not like it's incapable of doing it. And I think this is something that Anbernic just needs to fix in software later on. So I think that this is, especially because we still have a month before these get delivered. Basically, I'm saying this to you now so that you get an idea of, this is one review of this particular device, and I think that it can be fixed in software. So do be mindful as time goes on to continue to see that Anbernic addresses this before you even start going into it. Getting into the rest of the build quality for the Anbernic RG DS, honestly, there's things that Anbernic really does well when it comes to attention to detail in a lot of different ways, especially when it comes to older handhelds, where they pay a lot of respect to how it was made before. There's lots of tiny little details that maybe people don't notice, but it's kind of cool to see, because like when you compare, I have a DSi XL, and when you compare both of them, what you'll find is that Nintendo did a thing where the top layer, the top part of the clamshell, actually has a glossy finish. And if you flip them over, you'll find that the bottom side and the rest of it is actually a matte finish. And what Anbernic has done is basically replicated this to do what the DS had done. So it's a tiny little attention to detail that I really like. And if you open it up, it has the same type of feel. So even a very low profile dome-based D-pad, which I'll get into a D-pad review in just a moment, but even how the bottom display will kind of crater up to where it's positioned, they have that being the same as well. So overall, this is just to communicate that the build quality has a level of attention and detail that is often present in a lot of Anbernic devices, and I really appreciate it, because when you compare both of these devices, it does fairly represent what a DSi XL is, obviously with all of the niceties of using Android 14, and you can do dual screen fun stuff like having the top display do something else like watch videos and stuff, or do translation. There's some cool stuff that a DS can't do that the RG DS can do. So there's extra things there, obviously, in the limit of what the power is capable of. So let's start getting into what this device is capable of. If we just get into benchmarks, the Geekbench score is really poor compared especially to like the AYN Thor. There's a massive difference between what the capabilities of this thing are, especially from single-threaded and multi-threaded scores. So this should signify to you a giant departure from what these are capable of, let alone the GPUs. But, you know, the price difference is also there. But I would say that the AYN Thor isn't terribly overpriced. It's actually a very well-priced device, and probably why Anbernic didn't even bother going into a more high-spec device, because as they get closer to that price range, the AYN Thor is still probably going to beat it. So going at this very low price threshold is probably why they are going for this particular market, because they can at least exist in that market in the very low end spec, where the AYN Thor and the iNeo are in a league of their own. So what does that mean? What is it capable of? Effectively, what that means is that there are some caps, right? So pretty much Dreamcast is going to be your absolute apex of what is capable to be emulated on this device. A lot of Sega Saturn games won't be playable. N64 is quite playable. PlayStation is very playable on this. PSP is very playable. Obviously, the Nintendo DS, anything under that, Game Boy Advance, in Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. So all of those will emulate just fine. But that's pretty much the tier of where you're going to be looking. I would argue that based on the form factor and what's here, that most people would be far more interested in the DS capabilities of this. So actually playing DS games on this particular device, though you can do really cool stuff. Like I mentioned before, play game on the bottom and have a video running at the top. If you wanted to do two things, like if you wanted to watch a documentary or something that's playing, or a podcast on the top while you're playing something on the bottom, it can be pretty cool to do. So there is that, but that's basically where this is getting from the CPU side. So just do be aware that there are real limits to what this is capable of. Perhaps custom firmware or updates will take this a little bit further, but overall, be very mindful of what you're going to be able to accomplish with this device. One last bit that I want to talk about, and this is part of the build quality, but it's also the D-pad and how it is representative of an original Nintendo DS, where the very low profile type of D-pad that it is. That does have an impact in the usability of the D-pad. So there are a few things that I would just like to address there. Overall, Anbernic is very good at doing D-pads, but I would say because of the compromises with trying to replicate what a DS was capable of, you run into situations where the D-pad input isn't super awesome. And basically what that means is that the D-pad is totally fine and is dome-based type of D-pad, but in terms of use, I would overall give it like a B ranking, maybe a B minus ranking. Anbernic has done far better in D-pads, but trying to replicate what the Nintendo DS was more, there are some things that were compromises there. It's not bad by any means. I would just say that, you know, don't go into it anticipating that this is going to be a super awesome D-pad, because Anbernic has done better, and that's not where this is. All the other buttons function fine and analog sticks function fine, so it's as what you should expect. But for me, the D-pad is under what Anbernic is mostly known for. So can I recommend the Anbernic RG DS? It's kind of weird where this device finds itself, to be honest, because there are already dual screen devices that are out there, and they are super nice. They're in a whole other league of their own. So this is on the far end of the other side, where it's very low cost. And there are places where that makes sense, but even when we get into addressing that, one thing that they do need to fix, obviously, is that software issue where the top panel goes into, as far as I can see it, a power saver mode. And that does need to get fixed, because going to 40 hertz after 30 to 40 seconds is not great, especially for playing games and DS. So that needs to just be locked to 60 hertz. So that's one thing that I'm not really too concerned about. That seems like a trivial software fix. So I think that's going to be fixed. The one part that I wish was here, and maybe this is a nitpick, but I also kind of think about, like, who is this designed for? Because if this is a low cost DS only, not the 3DS and not high end thing, and it's $100 shipped for something without a micro SD card, who is this really for? And I consider this to be like something that if you were a parent and you wanted to get something for a child, this becomes far more attractive, because they could break it, they could do whatever they want, versus those $250, $300 devices. That becomes a different thing of what you're going to give a kid. So this is in that realm. And it becomes kind of weird to me, because this pen, which is really cool, I just wish that they included some way to slot this in, if they just designed their own and had it so that it could slot in here. Because I think this alone would have separated it from those more high-end devices, just because having something like that becomes something that becomes a bigger value. And now just giving this to a kid, for sure, this is going to get lost in 3 minutes. This is just going to get completely lost if you give this to a kid. So more or less, you're just going to be giving them this, and they're just going to be using their finger, which isn't as nice, honestly, to play DS games. It really requires a stylus, something that's not going to obfuscate what you're looking at like your big fingers will. So I don't know. I think that's one thing that they could have done a little bit better. That is obviously a hardware thing that they're not going to fix here. So overall, I don't know that I can give this a full recommendation. I think that Anbernic really nailed what it feels like to have like a DSi XL. They are very, very similar in design principles, how they are made, lots of small attention to detail to how that is. That I absolutely love. I think that's super awesome. But, it's also a very compromised device insofar as what it's capable of compared to what's out today. Yeah, you have to pay more, but I kind of think that, the 250, $300 devices are worth it. But that's me. I'm very performance minded type of person. I don't know that everyone's like that. Maybe you just want to play DS. If you just want to play DS, I think the only misgiving that I would give is just be mindful and continue to look for updates to see if Anbernic addresses the top screen panel going to being locked at 60 hertz all the time. And that's basically what I would say, generally speaking, for that. Thank you very much to my YouTube members as well as my Patreon members. Your support really means the world to me, guys. I hope this video is informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time and thanks for watching.